All right, this is part. Honestly, I don't even know what part this is now, but changes to societies and methods of production. Chapter 11 in the review book. All right, first thing we're going to deal with are the rise of new political elites, and a couple of these you need to be aware of. Number one is in China, you have the Qing dynasty or the Manchus come in and take over, and in Latin America, you have the hierarchy we previously talked about in Latin America with Peninsulares, Creoles, and Mestizos. Now, along with these new political elites, you also have a rise in economic elites during this time period as well, and this is simply because of the trade that's going on for the first time on a global stage. And these new economic elites doesn't matter where they're at, but they're the merchants who are involved in the new global trade network. Along with these new elites, you also have some developments in Christianity at this time due to it being transferred from the old world to the new world, or from Europe to the Americas. The first is in Latin America, and I guess it's just a spread of Christianity in general. But in Latin America, you begin to see the development of what is called the cult of saints, and it's another example of syncretism. And what happens is natives begin to assign the same responsibilities of their native gods to Christian saints. So you see kind of a transferring stuff from that. Also is Vodun, which we know as voodoo, which transfers over from West Africa through the slave culture and goes through some changes and some blending as it makes its way to the New World. In Europe, some of the changes in Christianity are due specifically to the Protestant Reformation. We went over that pretty in depthly in class, so just to kind of remember off the top of your head, you need to be aware of what Martin Luther, the originator of the Protestant Reformation, what he was griping about with his theses and things like that, and also the problems he had with indulgences, which we have previously talked about. You need to know the spread of the Reformation is specifically due to the popularization of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg, and the global effect of it is a group of missionaries called the Jesuits come out of this, and they're Protestant missionaries, which are a little bit different than the Catholic missionaries we've talked about up to this point. We also see some developments in labor systems during this period. Just looking at my notes real quick. And I apologize for that. Peasant labor begins to increase because of the need for goods. Okay, with a global trade network, you obviously need to produce more stuff because you have new markets to sell to. So you need more labor, and that comes in the form of peasant labor. And also, slavery intensifies, particularly on sugar plantations, and as we move with tobacco and things like that. Now, along with this intensification of slavery in the New World, you also have two other forms of labor that really become more widespread during this time, and it's an effort to supplement or to add to the slave labor that's already there. First is the Encomienda system, in which settlers are granted native laborers to work the land. So, in other words, these Spanish settlers who come in are basically given natives to work on their land or work in the mines, particularly Potosi, which is or Potosi, however you want to pronounce it, which is the largest silver mine in the world at this time. You also have the META system, which we've already talked about, but it takes a little bit of a different turn during this period in the fact that they're still requiring natives to work on public works, but it's not being done by the native kings, it's being done by the Spanish. The next labor system is indentured servitude, which is specifically for the Americas, and it really begins towards the end of this time period to shift to North America. Like I've said earlier, I believe it's a way for Europeans to come to the New World for free. Okay, you provide labor for someone paying for your trip, and at the end of the term, you're free from your obligations. And in theory, these indentured servants would receive some land and the tools that they worked with, and some things to help them get a heads up or a head start in the new world to take advantage of. All right, so that wraps up chapter 11. Next, we're going to move on to chapter 12, which is developments in government during this time period. Once again, it's 1450 to 1750, and we'll roll on from there. All right, so the first thing in chapter 12, once again, talking about developments in government during this period, is that existing governments begin to maintain or increase their power. So, in other words, the people that we've talked about up to this point are pretty much staying where they're at, or they're getting larger. And you've got to be able to differentiate between land empires and sea empires during this period. And the two main land empires are China and Russia. As you can see, the Chinese Empire shaded in yellow on this map, and you're going to need to be able to recognize these empires on a map. You see them in yellow, and then the Russian Empire is in red. Obviously, they've done a lot of expanding to their land empire to the east in what is now known as Siberia. All right, so the first land empire we're going to look at is China, and remember, they have been taken over by the Manchus and become the Qing dynasty during this period. The Manchus, once again, were invaders who came from the northern part of the continent, or, creatively enough, what is known as Manchuria. Now, what they begin to do during this time period is they start adding land, mainly because they're scared of Russian expansion. They're scared of Russia coming in, being a threat to them and all that kind of stuff. So what they do is they expand north to take in north and west a little bit to establish a buffer zone between them and the Russian power. And also the Mongols still tie into this as well, even though they're nowhere near as powerful as they were previously. They're still expanding just once again to give them a buffer zone between them and these people. As far as the characteristics of the Manchus or the Qing, some of the things they did. Number one, they didn't force people to adopt Chinese practices. They were pretty cool with the face and the customs of the people that they absorbed into their dynasty. As long as they didn't cause any trouble, they didn't really worry about it. They did, however, limit the movement of the pastoralists in Central Asia. That's particularly because they're worried about the resurgence of the Mongols, and it's a way to alleviate or to lessen the threat from them. One of the things that is a change, I guess, from the previous period is that they kind of allowed Silk Road trade to decline. It wasn't really a concern of them because, as we've talked about previously, China is more worried about itself than anything else. And if Silk Road, if they don't care about it, they're not going to put any time into it. So it begins to decline during the Manchu. Russia also begins to add territory during this time. Now remember, they're a land empire, so everything is tied into the original Russian landmass. Okay, so they're not going out and exploring or conquering really anywhere else in the world, particularly in North and South America, outside of the little Alaska up here. But remember, it's very close to eastern Russia. So they're adding their territory, and they're doing it through conquest. They're going to take over the peoples who were there. There are some similarities between them and the Manchus. Number one, they insisted on farming instead of pastoralism. So as they encountered these people in Central Asia, in the Caucasus region down in here, they forced these people to convert from a pastoral economy and process to agriculture. They also, like China, used the local people to build public works like roads or things like that, and they were also tolerant of other religions. Once again, if those people weren't a threat, if they weren't causing any trouble for them, they didn't care what you believed or anything, as long as you did not mess with the empire, I guess is the best way to put it. One of the main guys you may be responsible for when it comes to Russia is Peter the Great, and you'll see him in the context of what's called Westernization, which is where Peter the Great realizes that to compete with Europe, he needs to be more like Europe. So he goes on kind of a fact-finding mission, or he goes undercover into Europe to see how their industry runs, how their manufacturing runs, how their military works, and things like that. And then he tried to apply that to Russia. He tried to convert their military over to a more European organization and a way of going about fighting. Also, he tried to bring some kind of industry into Russia to just put them on a parallel with Europe, because he considered them to be a part of Europe and not of Asia. So he wanted to be kind of in line with what they were doing. All right, we move from the land empires, once again, of China and Russia, over to the sea empires of this time period. And we're talking Spain, England, France, Holland, and the Ottomans. And what makes them a sea empire, and I've told y'all this in class just to keep it easy for you, you had to get on a boat to go to some of your lands. Spain and England. Portugal's kind of out of the game at this point, so Spain becomes the forefront of the power. Spain, obviously, with Spain, England, France, and Holland, we're talking in the New World and Asia, Southeast Asia, particularly the Spice Islands and the Ottoman Empire. And I've got to lean in a little bit here. We're talking a little bit around the Mediterranean and points east. So you need to be, once again, able to recognize these on a map and associate it with the Europeans who took these places. As far as the similarities go with these people, we're mainly focusing on the European powers. The colonies that they control become part of the mercantilist system that I talked about in the last one. The fact that you use these colonies for raw materials and markets to kind of exploit them, to make sure you're not spending money or you're making as much money as possible. Because remember, the basic tenet, the basic thing of the mercantilist system is that you need to export more than you import. So you got to sell more than you buy. Also, the conversion of natives falls into this as well, and kind of gives them a moral standpoint to be able to go in and colonize these people. As far as the differences in them, with Spain and Portugal, they're more directly involved in the day-to-day running of their place, or as well as they can be with communication and transportation technology the way it was then. So more directly involved in governing their territories, and they did this through people called viceroys. And what they did is they basically got conditions on the ground, sent news back or sent requests back to figure out what the monarchs wanted to do. So the monarchs were more hands-on when it comes to Spain and Portugal. With the Dutch, French, and British, there's a lot more local control. In other words, they trust the people, or they realize it's infeasible to be able to control these places from thousands of miles away. So they put the control in the hands of their governors or whoever the people are that are in these colonies. And that plays a pretty big role in going forward with the American Revolution, and the fact that they kind of got to control things on their own for a long time before this revolution. And Spain and Portugal, um, outside of the other ones, began to add territory in Asia, particularly the Philippines, with Spain. Now, the Ottoman Empire, as you can see here, the key significance of the Ottoman Empire is it has always been a geographical and cultural crossroads that plays into the exploration because Europeans did not want to go through the Ottoman Empire and pay the taxes from it to get to the East Indies for spices. The launch point of it, where the Ottoman Empire really gets going, is with the conquering of Constantinople, where they begin to take over, and then they spread throughout the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern region. A couple of things we talked about in class as far as the characteristics of it: Janissaries, which were their soldiers, Christian slave soldiers, and the Devshirme system, which was how they went about getting these soldiers. Now, we've also at this time, during this time period, have new governments forming in Asia and Europe. The first of which is Japan, which is the Tokugawa shogunate. Um, Now, the things you need to know as far as they're concerned, at the beginning of the Tokugawas, they want guns. All right, so and the best way to get those this time is to deal with Europeans. So they're totally cool with the Europeans coming in and trading, just as long as they can get these firearms to help them contain control or keep control of their empire. Now, 1600s, they use these guns to be able to unite Japan, and once Japan is united and there's no more threat to them, they realize they don't need Europeans. They don't like the influence that's coming in. So they completely kick the Europeans out of Japan, and they begin to persecute the Christians who are in the form of missionaries who are left behind when this happens. And they go into a period of isolation that lasts for, I don't know, over 200 years. And it lasts until Commodore Matthew Perry comes in representing America and wants to open up trade agreements. And then once that happens, they begin to open up to the West a little bit more. Next on the list is the Netherlands, and they mainly spread into the southeastern Asia, particularly the Spice Islands, and they dominate trade for a significant time period down in here. And they're able to do it through their representatives through their company, which is known as the Dutch East India Company, which you may see in a document or on a question as the VOC. So be aware of where they go, why they're there, and who does it. So Dutch East India, Spice Islands, VOC. All right, next and very briefly, we've got to deal with the collapse of some empires during this time. And the first and one of the most important is the Aztecs. Now, as far as the components of the Aztecs, I'll elaborate on this a little bit more in class, but you need to know that they expanded before Europeans come in. We're going back a little bit here. They begin to expand through conquest and tribute, and we'll draw some similarities in class between them and other places. As far as the trade that they did, it's mainly metals and feathers. Another component of the Aztecs you may see is human sacrifice, which is not like they're drawing people out of their society. All right, they're going out and they're capturing people through conquest, through warfare. So they're mainly, I guess you could call them POWs or prisoners of war, and they're also slaves that they capture during these raids and things like that. Now, they're no different than anywhere else we've talked about this year when they fall, and it's due to, and it doesn't happen immediately, it happens over time, and it's a combination of internal pressures and outside pressures. The internal pressures they're dealing with is unrest among conquered peoples. In other words, the people that they've conquered are getting a little bit rowdy over the fact that they're having to pay this tribute and doing all this stuff. Um, that's happening, so there's a period of instability, and it just so happens, like everywhere else we've talked about, somebody comes in to take advantage of this decline, this chaos, this instability, whatever you want to call it. And in this case, it happens to be the Spanish conquistadors with Cortez and all that, and they're able to take advantage and exploit these weaknesses and take them over. Next on the list in the Americas is the Inca, and it was the largest empire in the Americas at the time. They expanded just like the Aztecs through conquest and tribute, but unlike the Aztecs, they didn't treat the people they conquered as separate people to be exploited. They incorporated these people into the empire, so they became Inca when they took them over. Briefly, before I run out of time here, another characteristic of the Inca, all resources were owned by the government, be it land, products, whatever it is. Their record system is Kipu, I guess. We'll look at that in class, and then they fall for the same reason due to internal and outside pressures, the internal being civil war and disease, the outside being the Spanish conquistadors, once again, coming in at the right time. All right, that wraps up period 4. This is through chapter 12. Next time we'll pick up with period 5.